So nice to see those introductions coming through. And if you continue doing that, introducing yourself, I will continue to move on with the introductions. We are today talking about culture segments and refining your website user journeys. I'm particularly excited about this because we at HDK build websites all the time, and what we encourage our clients to think about is the people visiting their website, not necessarily the stuff that you want to get across all the time, but who is visiting your website and how do they want to interact with you through your website. So this is the topic for that, and we've got some really great speakers here today, so I'm going to introduce those people in just a moment. If it's the first time you've been to an HDK webinar, welcome. It's a real pleasure to see you here today. If you don't know who HDK are, we are a digital marketing agency. We work particularly in the arts, culture, heritage sector, creative industries as well. We build mainly websites, but we also run alongside that marketing program as well. So we'll talk more about that in a moment. Let me introduce today's speakers. My name is Hans. I'm going to be MC for today. I am director and founder at HDK. I'm a man in my mid-50s, very little hair on the top, bit of a beard to make up for it, brown eyes, and I'm wearing a blue checked shirt. And joining me today.
Hi everybody, I'm Antonia. I'm a senior project manager at HDK. I am a woman in my 30s. I have short brown hair, which is tied up today. I'm wearing glasses and a green shirt.
Katie, I'm not sure we can hear you.
It's a bad start, sorry.
Yeah.
Hi. I'm Katie. I'm a woman in my mid-50s. I've got short brown hair and brown eyes. I work with HDK on audience development and marketing consultancy.
And I should say this is Katie's first webinar for HDK, and we're very excited to have Katie. I've known Katie for 25 years. I realised that this morning, Katie, when I thought it's more than Dance Consortium, it's Sadler's Wells days as well. So we go back a long way, but I know about Katie. What she doesn't know about arts marketing is probably not worth knowing.
And
thank you, Chris.
Yep, and so and finally myself. My name's Chris. I'm from the audience agency. My role is head of product services and partnerships. I'm also a male in my mid-30s. I've got short brown hair, a beard, and a green shirt on.
And again, particularly excited to have Chris here representing the audience agency. Again, I know it's great to get the source of truth here in this webinar. So thank you, Chris, for joining us today. And what are we going to cover today? Well, Chris is going to start off appropriately with an overview of the audience agency and audience spectrum. And then we are going to have a go at some segmentation role play. Now, don't be nervous about this. There's a big group here today. So we'll split you into 5 groups, and one of us will help you facilitate those groups as well. And then we're going to look at how we can action some of those learnings. And then we'll finish off. Hopefully we'll have enough time to do some questions and discussions. And there I hope you'll be able to join us in that moment. But if you have any questions before that, don't hesitate to put them in the chat. One of us will try and find an appropriate moment to put that question to the speaker at that particular moment. And also, just to let you know, we record these sessions and we'll put those on the website in the next couple of days. So feel free to not take notes today, but just absorb and engage. And I'm sure the important things will stick with you, and the other things, the details, you can probably look those up later or watch the webinar again later. So that is what we're going to cover today. I'm now going to do another bit of interaction in the chat, so don't lose your access to the chat. We're going to ask a simple question, and I want you to answer with one word only. And that word could be either very, it could be somewhat, or it can be hardly. So hardly, somewhat, or very. And the question today, to get us all going, is: what's your level of experience with the audience agency's segments? What's your level of experience with the audience agency's segments. And if you could put one of those words in their chat, great, they're coming through already. That's really helpful to give us a flavour of how to present today, but that's really interesting. Someone's I didn't say middling, but I'll take that. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, no, I was going to say the same. I love the term middling from that point. Do feel free to keep typing through, but good to see some of those overview. The majority there looks to be around somewhat, I think, so far.
Yeah.
Okay, so there we go. Another hard there just at the bottom. So yeah, so I think the majority overall, just to sum them up, is probably around somewhat. So there is some existing knowledge in the room, but at the same time, maybe a refresher could be worthwhile from that sort of point of view around it. I think then, just from my side, I think firstly just to say thank you to Hand, Antonia and the HDK team for inviting us along today from that type of side. Do feel free to add any more if you'd like to at the bottom from that type of side. No? Okay, so we take that then as maybe all spent from that side. Oh yeah, that was the last chance to see if anyone had any more. So yeah, so thanks again for having us involved in this webinar. So a little bit of an overview just of the audience agency, if those of you don't know it already from that type of side. The audience agency, we're an audience insight and independent research agency, founded back in 2012, originally from a number of regional audience development bodies, which included Audiences London and All About Audiences up in Manchester. These days, we do quite a lot of different types of activities, both across consulting, also across our research activities as well. Primarily arts organisations or individuals in arts organisations know us for two of our central products, which is Audience Answers, which was the successor to Audience Finder, which was the platform set of services, and also sort of what we're going to be talking about today, which is Audience Spectrum, which is the segmentation system that we sort of use across the work that we do from that sort of point of view around it, and has sort of been used over the sort of the course of its lifetime in a few different capacities as well, both from funders, both of course as arts organisations as a practical in-house based segmentation system, and also sort of part of our wider sort of research activity as well from that type of side. So if we jump on and sort of basically, we also start with sort of thinking about what do we actually mean by the term segmentation from that sort of point of view around it. Obviously, the term segmentation, it's certainly not a term that's necessarily that new from that sort of point of view, but it is used in quite a few different ways from that type of area as well. I think in terms of sort of our Hans described it as well in the introduction, we essentially mean sort of the process of eventually splitting customers or potential customers into different groups, which have the same or similar requirements in terms of how they're looking to engage with your product or indeed services from that sort of point of view, looking at a few of the people in the room today, and also how they would want to respond and work back from an engagement sort of area as well. So essentially, how can you then use that segmentation to personalize your communications and communicate your sales offer from that sort of point of view. That quote there is just taken from McDonald and Dunbar from that sort of point of view, which you might know a little bit about already as well, if you're on the other side. So on to thinking a little bit more just about sort of what it means in audience development, and sort of, as I say, why it matters in audience development from that type of side. It's a little bit more, this on later as well. But it's really sort of thinking about how it can essentially help you both personalize and sort of tailor your communications, both, of course, around your existing audiences, of course, also around your wider mission and purpose, of course, but also your individual efforts to both target your communications in terms of sales campaigns, in terms of revenue generation, and also, of course, in terms of around how to both track and sort of evaluate the activity as well from that type of area as well. And of course, there's always a key element when you're thinking about in terms of how to build new marketing campaigns, but of course also around both digital activities such as new websites, other types of digital products and things like that as well. So looking to sort of see how segmentation can be used in that, and really sort of defining a little bit of a basis of the groundwork, so then you can develop your activities on that, is sort of something we feel is really key as well. But of course, more generally, it just sort of helps you make sense of all of the data you've got and then be able to prioritize and sort of do something with it from that sort of point of view. You really want to go the basics almost in a way just to think about that as well. Again, I'm sure across your organizations, there is so many different data sources I'm sure you'll have available. I certainly did when I worked at arts organizations as well, both from audience data through box office systems, all of the information you can get through CMS systems from that sort of point of view, the online data you've got from Google Analytics to different social channels from that type of side as well. Even other sources, of course, primary research through surveys, venue management systems, things like that as well. So being able to make sense of that data is another sort of key reason, thinking about why segmentation is sort of a really key element across all that activity, really. So jumping a little bit in terms of the main sort of topic today, so sort of what is audience spectrum now, linking a little bit into obviously your responses there. Most people look to have some sort of knowledge of this already, and as usual in these sort of overviews, I won't get too technical in terms of how segmentation is built, but feel free to ask any questions in the right-hand side in the chat, and I will more than answer them from that sort of point of view around it. So fundamentally, what audience spectrum is, it's a segmentation, geodemographic-based segmentation that looks to analyze an individual based on their likely attendance to arts and culture. So basically, how likely are they to attend arts and cultural events from that sort of point of view around that as well. There's many different types of segmentations, do many sort of different things, but that's the main purpose of what audience spectrum is designed to do. So it works all the way down to a household level, if you've got that level of data from that sort of point of view, and its purpose is basically to, as I mentioned, to target an attitude towards arts and culture for cultural organisations from that sort of point of view around it. So it covers the whole UK population from that type of side. So it looks to profile an individual, if that be a booker through your ticketing system, or indeed a respondent which you've got through a survey, or other areas as well. So it looks to assign them one of the types that we'll see in a second from that sort of point of view. Along the bottom there, you'll see basically the 10 main codes. Don't worry, as Anne said, about making too many notes, but if you see on the left-hand side there, those are the 3 groups which are more highest engaged from that sort of point of view around it, and they roll back to those that are lower engaged. What we're not necessarily saying when you see charts such as this chart, as you can see, is just a coloured half circle, just has the infographics around that as well. What we're not necessarily saying is that the ones that are higher engaged are those that are most well off in society compared to those that are lower engaged that are the least well off in society. That's not what we're necessarily saying by this, but of course at the same time, particularly in the position that the UK economy and otherwise is, social demographics do make, and also the effects of the cost of living crisis, they do make a difference to arts engagement. Now, I'm sure that's not anything that's too new to sort of say that from that sort of point of view, but that is also represented in terms of the social economics of that as well. So that's a little bit just more broadly around audience spectrum from that time side as well. So yeah, mentioned most of those from that type of time, but I think particularly making it relevant to all cultural organisations of all shapes and sizes. Again, there's lots of different ways which you could segment your audiences, mostly using some of the tools you've got already, but basically having Spectrum as something that you can use alongside other ways of segmenting has always been sort of quite a key aim of what we've been looking to do with the segmentation. And of course, also sort of using real data from that sort of point of view around that as well. So it is sort of based on both real data, of course, data both from the sensors and also from the Experian data set that allows us to profile at a household level and adds all that wider data in, of course, also as well as research and audience data from the sources that we've got as well. But I think particularly ensuring that it's truly actionable is one of the main things that we want to do around that as well. So what we're segmenting, again, very, very, very quickly, it's these 4 elements here. So so this is the 4 elements of what we're describing and segmenting of the individual. So that's the behavior, the demographics, the geography, and the attitude from that sort of point of view around that. Obviously, we use different sources to identify those different sorts of things as well. But obviously, attitude, that last one in our case, is one of the most key things we're sort of looking for as well from that sort of point of view around that as well. But again, both that geography and demographic element, obviously, it is quite a key for us. And of course, the behavior in terms of how regularly they might have booked, how much they've spent, what they've actually done around that as well, to basically then assign them one of those 10 segment types. So if we look a little bit and just think about a little bit more around this, again, don't worry too much around remembering all of this from that sort of point of view around it in terms of both the uses or indeed the segments itself. Let's flip onto that next slide just there as well. Top uses, as we've sort of mentioned around that as well. I mentioned a little bit of them before, but it's really looking to help you as organisations identify specific audiences for certain events, look to tailor those campaigns around different audiences that you've got as well, and also different communication channels such as websites and things like that as well. But also for future planning, both for future planning of programming, particularly also if you're working with touring capacities as well, and also setting goals, thinking more about those long-term areas as well from that type of side. So before we jump into the next area, and again, don't worry too much around remembering too much of this. Again, I know quite a few of you are quite aware of what the segments are already from that type of side. If you wouldn't mind, Antonia, just flipping onto the next slide as well. This slide here just shows a quick overview of the 10 sub-segments or the 10 first-tier segments that we've got at the audience agency from that type of area as well, with a short description of each one afterwards. The 10, very, very briefly, those on the left-hand side in red are those that we class as being highest engaged to the arts. They are Metro Culturals, Commuter Land Culture Bus, and Experience Seekers. Those in yellow, starting from the second to the bottom on the left-hand side of that chart, and in the top right are dormitory dependables, trips and treats, and home and heritage. They are those which are actually classed as being medium engaged to the arts. They do actually make up the majority of arts audiences across the UK, those 3 medium engaged groups. So though they're not necessarily the highest engagement, they are actually the majority of actual arts audiences in the UK from that standpoint point of view. And those on the right-hand side, Up Our Street, Frontline Families, Kaleidoscope Creativities, and Supporters Communities from that type of side as well. So they were the ones that would be more least engaged, basically based on their likeliness to attend. To take one as just a quick example, Experience Seekers, so those are what we class as sort of, they're relatively highly active audience segments and also very diverse as well from that sort of point of view. An audience that's, a segment that sort of generally are between the ages of 18 up to 34 from that sort of point of view around it. They're not necessarily sort of the type in terms of arts attendance where they've really sort of understood and really sort of know what they like and are frequent bookers around it. They can be quite diverse in terms of the amount of content that they book from that sort of point of view around that. Also in terms of necessarily spend and some of the physical activities around that as well. They are a group that are most likely to attend digitally, book and communicate digitally from that sort of point of view around it. And sort of include sort of what we sort of class as those that are sort of students from that sort of point of view around it as well from that sort of point of view, but also also those that are graduates, potentially in sort of the early to sort of mid stages of their careers from that sort of point of view. So sort of covers across those two sort of areas in terms of demographics as well from that type of side. Therefore, then, if we're then to break down those groups into their subsegments overviews from that sort of point of view on it, you'll see here the same chart, but they're broken down into their individual subsegments from that point of view. In terms of using audience spectrum, we'd always say look to identify and understand your main segments first, and then if you need to break further down and personalize, look to use this through these subsegments, but particularly if you're an organization that's working with a lot of audiences, or indeed working with clients or otherwise that are in large urban areas, the subsegments can be quite useful. The experience seekers, if we just sort of say they're breaking down into those two areas. So E1 are those that are more sort of, as I mentioned, in the early to mid stage of their careers from that sort of point of view. They do actually make slightly more arts bookers from that sort of point of view around that as well from that type of side. But again, they still have those same mindsets and same habits of it. And E2s are more of the audit classes, more sort of students and more sort of early graduates from that sort of point of view. Obviously, students themselves certainly as a segment in certain more area, or certainly a changing segment, I know for a lot of you, but just to sort of break that down a little bit further on it. So that's just one sort of example. You can break that down for many of the other segments as well, but hopefully that's sort of a useful start to sort of how they will put together from that sort of point of view around it. Again, to find out more information around some of the segments, there'll be some links afterwards, but this is just a full overview of all the information you can find out about experience seekers, which, to be honest, is probably more than your bedtime reading from that time of side. But you could look at this and also break down in terms of how the data is structured as well from that time of side. That what I mentioned there is also included in the motivational guide, which is a short PDF document as well. So yeah, I think that's just a little bit of an overview just to start. The last sort of thing just in terms of helping you understand it would be the audience spectrum mapping tool. Again, I know quite a few of you in the room might be familiar with this already. This just looks at the population through audience spectrum. So certainly worth having a link in, particularly if you are a venue-based organisation or indeed a touring organisation that frequently attends the same communities and neighbourhoods across the UK, to give a little bit of an overview in terms of what audience spectrum is looking like within the population of that area. This is when we're looking at audience spectrum through the population. Of course, you can look at it for your own audiences as well, but just to give that oversight in terms of what it's looking there as well from that type of side. So if you love maps more generally, then this is certainly something to have a little bit of a look at. But hopefully that just gives a little bit of an overview. And also thanks for all your questions that I can just see.
Yeah, Chris, I'm going to put one of the questions to you if that's okay. So this is from Cara, and she's recognizing that we're talking about culture and art galleries and theatres and museums, but how would this link to sports? So for example, she could you explain this further in regards to your audience section? I work in comms where I can link up with leisure sector centres, and I think that question was inspired by the icon of the tennis racket. So yeah, does this link to the sports events?
Yes, I was going to say audience spectrum has been used back out to sports events as well. Obviously, as I mentioned at the start, its primary purpose is to understand the likeliness to engage to arts and cultural events from that sort of point of view around it. How we've usually worked it across sports events is to use it as an individual segmentation element from that sort of point of view around it. So let's say we break them all down and look at them, which ones are experience seekers. Then we would then say, look, okay, we can see, let's take a stereotypical example. Let's say you're working in cricket from that sort of point of view around it. So how many times have they attended particular cricket events? How many times have they particular series and the pricing as well? So you're using that in terms of a sports sort of point of view, just to obviously get an initial overview of what they might look like in terms of their background to attend, and also sort of adding this on in terms of different elements of how that sport would offer from that sort of point of view around it as well. So it can certainly be used in that sort of sporting offer from that sort of point of view around that as well from that type of side. If that sort of answers that question, Coral, without me doing I can answer that question in about 5 minutes or 2 minutes. I'll keep it short, just the time today. But if it's useful to chat afterwards, then I can give a bit more of a floor overview.
Right. And I can see that Lucy's also shared a link to the Audience Spectrum's website as well for more details there as well.
Yes,
Amazing.
that's everything from me. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. So with taking that overview in the audience spectrum, we wanted to then look at an exercise on how to apply it and think about those audiences when you're going through your user journey for your website. And to do this, a great way is to create a persona. And a persona helps you get into the mind of that audience as you go through all those different touch points before they reach your website, when they're on your website, and after as well. So we do have an activity to go through with you. But first, we wanted to share an example of a persona, which Katie is going to just talk us through a little bit.
So this is really taking the audience agency segment, the experience seeker that Chris has already talked about, and looking more directly at their digital engagement. So Emma is probably somebody that a lot of you will recognize as an attender at your organization, or someone that you would like to try and attract to your organization. She's it's quite interesting, this age. I think this age is something that we've put here that she's 26, but it's worth bearing in mind that I think experience seekers is a very, very broad category. But basically, these people are very digitally savvy. They're also, they know what they want, but they're also very open to new cultural experiences if they're being communicated in the right way and if the messaging is right. If they feel that this is something that is going to add value to their lives. So these people are interested in immersive experiences. These are the people that the word immersive was defined for, really. So they're the ones who are often, they're your early adopters. They're straight in there when there's some sort of rooftop cinema type experience. I've said that they were likely to be the ones queuing for Oasis tickets and then very stroppy with the dynamic pricing. They see culture as absolutely crucial to their lives, and they are constantly on the lookout for new ways of broadening their cultural experiences. They want to be an opinion former within their friendship groups and their families. They want to have been the first to have heard of something and then to organize groups of friends to go and actually attend something. So these are people that are crucial to you. These are people that it's absolutely crucial that your website is working for, and that your social media platforms are working for, and that not only are those platforms engaging and easy to access, but there are also ways for them to share information because they want to, they're social media completely savvy. These are the people who will be posting. The metric culturals, which is another very, very interesting group, are the ones who are very, very similar, but they are unlikely to be, they will be liking posts. They're less likely to be actually originating content. Experience seekers, you need to be making sure that you've got information that they can share amongst their friendship groups and families. So when we've talked about the pain points and the frustrations, which is extremely important when you're looking at website journeys and your social media platforms, it's just being overwhelmed. So it's making sure that she's being presented with information that she's really going to engage with. And it's making sure that she has, these people do have an element of disposable income, but they're very careful about how they spend it, particularly if they're in the younger category. So they will be choosing to spend it on arts events and cultural events, but they need to know that they're getting value for money, or that they're taking a risk that's going to pay off in some way. So that's them. These are personas that we create them for each of the different 10 categories that are under the audience spectrum. And when we come on to the exercise that we're going to play now, you can see how we can consider all of the different potential pain points, or the way that we encourage those different segments through that map to become loyal at the end of it. So this is I think, Antonia, are you going to talk us through this spreadsheet we've got in front of us here?
Yes, absolutely. So this is an example of a user journey map template, which you can then use to prompt those thoughts about that persona and how they might interact with you at different points of their journey. So the journey steps are along the top, looking at awareness. So how is that persona coming across your organization? How are they finding out about that event that you're talking about? Then it moves into consideration. This might be when they're on your website, they're taking a look through the event details, they're finding out more about who you are, considering if they are able to donate as well. So the consideration point is when they're really thinking about whether or not they want to commit and buy a ticket or to become a loyal member. And then conversion is when they take that step, they've made a decision and they are going to book to come and see a show, they're going to sign up and be a member, they're going to donate, they might sign up to your newsletter. So there's different layers of conversions based on what action you want them to take. Endorsement is the step after. So it might be that once they've booked your tickets, they then share that event with their friends or share on social media that they're coming to visit. Or after they visited, how they then endorse your organization. Do they post about it whilst they're there? And how else they kind of support you. And then loyalty is how they then come back again. So they've been on your website, they've booked a ticket. How do we then make them from being like a first-time buyer to becoming a loyal advocate for your organization, for example? So the activity that we're going to look at today is on Figma. And we've pre-populated this spreadsheet, as you can see, with examples for each of these sections. And then we're going to work together on thinking about the opportunities. So if we go through this in a little bit more detail, and I'll hand you back over to Katie.
Sorry, Nicole. So as you can see, this is really an exercise that you can do with your team or yourself, where you consider what are the steps that you need to do to take someone. So for in this example, sorry, in this example, the experience seeker on the journey. So when we look at awareness, so we're trying to be, this is the very first introduction that someone has to you. And one of the things we wanted to talk about in detail on this one, obviously that they're going to come across about you in a number of ways, but crucially, as we all know, is word of mouth. And so at this stage, it's making sure that there's positive endorsement from local artists, particularly that you might not think about, other members of your community. And in addition to that, there's obviously things like a targeted newsletter. Obviously, this is where your social media comes in, but are people going to come across you? Or are we going to be looking at targeted adverts? So if you don't have the resources for that, the thing that you can have some control over is word of mouth when it comes to awareness. Then looking at consideration. So someone's thought, okay, that looks quite interesting. So-and-so's mentioned it to me and I like them. So, but is this the kind of thing that I want to share with my friends and family? Is this the kind of thing that I want to go to with a mate? So we look at that, or we look at other things, or I'm looking for, is this something that's popular or immersive? Is this something that's going to pay off for me to be a part of? So that's on the consideration. Then we're moving on to the conversion. So we've got someone who's already thinking, yeah, I'm going to book a ticket. And then at this stage, the information has to be very clear, has to be very straightforward how someone's going to make a booking, has to be obvious how what the additional hidden costs are, or how much is a program going to cost me? Are you going to add a booking fee? All those things need to be very, very clear for those people once they're at this stage. And then it's that they want to talk about it. Are you going to give them the opportunities to talk about it? And then when we get on to the endorsement, this is where we're looking at the potential. So it's very difficult to see on the Figma, but we're now at, if we come out, we look that we're at pain points. So what are the potential problems? On the pain points on the left-hand side, looking over to making someone endorse your organization is that maybe potentially the newsletter isn't curated enough for them. A lot of you won't have the resources or the capacity to do segmented newsletters. So is it possible to do things like, if you enjoyed such and such, you're really going to enjoy this? So are there ways of making sure that those potential pain points, the purpose of this Figma is that you go through this process yourselves. You can consider what are going to be the pain points when it comes to conversion. What are the pain points when it comes to loyalty? What are the opportunities when it comes to endorsement? What are the opportunities when it comes to loyalty? And this is a process that you yourselves go through. You consider a typical user, you break them down into the audience agency segments. And for each one of those segments, you go through this process. And we've looked at then with loyalty, it's again, these are the people who are your donors, they're your advocates. These are the people who are out there talking about your organization. And then, as Antonia mentioned, this is completes the cycle. We bring these people back in, and the process becomes so much easier. We've got them. As we know, it's always so much cheaper to persuade someone you've already got, who's already come, rather than starting the process right the way over on the left-hand column with awareness all the way again. So once you've cracked for the different segments, those endorsements and loyalty columns, the job just becomes so much easier once this journey is very, very smooth. So you can see, I can see you're all over it. So you can see how it works. It's a very straightforward. Antonia and I have just recently done this with the Museum of the Home in East London. And it's just been really, really interesting and great fun to go through. And between us, we've come up with so many more because we've been very, very specific to the museum and very specific to the museum's ambitions and objectives. So what we are wanting to do now, I think, Antonia, we're going to go into groups, aren't we?
Yes, absolutely. So we're going to just, for about 5 minutes, because we've not got a lot of time, we're just going to break into 5 groups and talk about the opportunities for these different points on their journey. And then we'll come back together and just share 1 or 2 of them. So once you've organised those and you've categorised them into different areas, such as usability issues or content gaps, for example, you can then have a clear understanding of what's working and where improvements are needed most. It's important to note that this exercise is really helpful to do alongside looking at your Google Analytics and your ticketing data so that you can get a really clear overview and a fuller picture of how your audiences are engaging with you and make some informed decisions there. You then want to prioritize your findings, where you then focus on impact versus effort. So you want to attack the quick wins first. So high impact and low effort changes that can immediately enhance your user experience. That might be simplifying a contact form that's on your website or improving the navigation. It's best to prioritize the changes that are going to impact your users and align with their goals overall. So really thinking about what it is that's motivating them and how you can help meet them in the middle and make it an easier journey for them. And then you want to, once you've set all of your priorities, you then want to start making those changes. That could be some really straightforward ones that you'll be able to update yourself. So reviewing and updating content, making sure that that information is clear and concise, adding in any helpful buttons and click to actions that can help users get to their next step nice and smoothly. But there also might be some more complex problems like redesigning your checkout process, where you'll want to engage with your web developers. It's really helpful to collaborate with your whole team, because this kind of information and intel on who your audiences are isn't just helpful for marketing and comms, but also the wider team who are also impacting your audiences, including programming, for example. So it's great to collaborate with your whole team. And then finally, measure success. So as you're going through this process, setting some key KPIs that you can then refer back to. It might be conversion rates or planning user surveys that you can repeat so that you can revisit and fine-tune your progress, because user journeys is an ongoing process really as you work on it. So by following those steps, you can make sure that you have valuable insights. Everything that you've gathered can then translate into a meaningful improvements for your website, and ultimately a better and happier user experience.
Just come back to the Q&A. We've got a few minutes left. I think we'll probably go over a little bit. So completely understand if you've got a dash for other meetings, but if you want to hang around, we've got a few moments for some questions here. So put them in the chat, and then maybe if you're happy to, you can also, when we come to your question, you can actually voice them on screen as well. So that's always nice to hear from you directly. But while so put your questions in the chat box while you think of your questions as well. Maybe Chris, I've got a question. A lot of time and effort has gone into creating this system. Where do you see the future of this? What are the exciting things on the horizon for this?
Yeah, well, I think for us, obviously Audience Spectrum, it's sort of been about version 4 already, full version 4 around it. It was released back in 2015. I think right now, sort of seeing what else we can do to really sort of get more around all the potential around the data sources that can factor into the segmentation, and indeed other data sources, I think is the really sort of exciting thing from that type of area as well. We've sort of started this through a bit of sort of a research project with the University of Leicester from that sort of point of view around it. So to sort of basically explore ways around sort of areas of both machine learning and AI, to be honest, could be used to benefit arts audiences segmentation, and really sort of seeing a little bit more around that as well, and sort of using some of the capabilities of what we can to get more scopes around audiences as well. Obviously, Spectrum very much now is the algorithm-based approach. It's reading the data sources and the population data that we've got, but to have something else that can add to that and really think about it in other ways, particularly, you know, as people engage in different ways digitally, and also as those trends change. You know, I'm not going to say, I'm just mentioning our groups, I'm not going to use the example of, say, how platforms such as X has changed in the last 2 years from that sort of point of view, which I think has changed so much around how a lot of arts organisations use that platform around it. But how something like that, how we can use other ways, which are also cost effective, and also ways that can both benefit the sector, but be able to do that, I think is really sort of the exciting thing. We've sort of started this now. I think it'll, you know, about another year away until probably we're close to some of those things. But that's for me is probably the exciting thing about what we can do with this type of model moving forward as well.
Brilliant, thank you. That's really exciting. I'm really interested in the AI elements of that as well. So I'm looking forward to see how these things develop over time. Antonia and Katie, maybe the tool that we explored. Oh, we've got another question. Sorry, let me do that one first. We've got our first meeting with Lucy next week. This is from Cara. So it's great to have an introduction to audience agency. How much hand-holding do you give to help utilize the data to the best, or is that dependent on the price level you pay for?
Yeah, good question. Well, I was going to say, I think the first question is we can sort of provide as much hand-holding as sort of what you need to sort of get started. I think we're sort of thinking about the objectives that you've got as well from that sort of point of view around that. But yeah, I was going to say, I think we can certainly provide as much support as sort of what you need around that. Obviously, with some of the more paid packages, there is larger levels of sort of in-person support, but obviously it's still quite a lot of this. And I mentioned everything I mentioned today in terms of the resources. They're all completely available free of charge from that sort of point of view around it. So there's no price points around any of that. Obviously, they're all available onto that, or similar sort of exercises, of course, of what we've done today from that sort of point of view around that. That's all there around that.
And can I just chip in? As someone who uses the audience agency all the time and is constantly asking irritating questions, they do a lot of hand holding.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah,
I didn't ask Kate to give that endorsement, but that's not known.
And Antonia, is that Dina's question you responded to, Antonia? No. So Dina asks, where has it gone? I'm having a look at the segments on the link shared above. We know our key segments. Is there somewhere on the website we can download a quick overview of the segments to share with colleagues?
They should be on the website. However, we also do have a little one-pager. We've got a printed version of this, but also a one thing of that as well. So we can send that over to you from that sort of point of view around it. To, you know, if you want to print it out and stick it on the wall from that sort of point of view around it. I will see if I can link it for the end of the session, but if not, we can send it over to you afterwards from that sort of point of view around it.
Yeah, and Heidi asked this earlier on, so I'm just bringing this question up. So is there a persona for, so we showed a persona of, it was Emma, wasn't it, for audience, for experience seekers. Are there personas for each of those personas? Because it's Heidi felt it was a really good illustration of that segment.
They are some example segments, personas in the individual persona guides as on that as well. If you link through to the resources that was clicked earlier, there's a little bit of an example. However, I would always recommend looking to sort of tailor it to your own offer and to your own audiences from that sort of point of view around it. Because, for example, if you were a touring organisation based in Scotland, for example, from that sort of point of view, then your persona in that example, of course, they'd have the same sort of core characteristics, but they look a little bit different around that as well. So yes, practically, but I'd also think about it from that type of side as well, but we can link that back across.
Yeah. And then I've got, to give you time to do that, I'll ask a question for Antonia and maybe Katie. So the tool that we went through earlier on, obviously we were thinking this session very much about the audience agency and the segments. I can see there are people in the group who maybe aren't thinking about audiences that we've been talking about, but maybe a B2B type of businesses. How much of that tool is useful for the process of building a website for those sorts of people where they're not necessarily thinking about the audiences, but they are building a website?
It's still a really helpful exercise to go through because you can go through it even without that persona in mind. And if you go through it in terms of thinking about what actions you want somebody to take as they get onto your website or as they engage with you, you can still go through those steps and I guess think with your own applying your own kind of common sense to it of if you were going through that activity yourself and you needed to find out this information, where would it be and how can I make that process easier? So it is a really helpful tool in terms of breaking it down, because obviously there's so many steps in ways you can communicate with different people and your website is the central point of that. So really thinking about it systematically is a great approach. And it is a helpful tool.
Right, thank you. Yeah, and Kit, I had you in mind with that question. So thank you.
Can I ask Chris a very quick question, which came up in our group? I just want to know how relevant he thinks the age guidelines are in the audience spectrum, because as I use them, the more I use them, the less relevant I find those age guidelines.
Yeah, so the age guidelines, they're essentially based on the data that comes in terms of what the dominant age profile would be for each of the individual segments from that sort of point of view around it. They do vary slightly for some of the segments, and also for some of them, obviously, for example, if you take commuter line culture buses and another example, between the ages of 45 to really 60, 65, of course, it's quite a long gap from that sort of point of view around it from that type of side. So I think that's certainly useful. Again, what I would say is think about how it relates back directly to your own offer from that sort of point of view around it. Because if we just jump back to the experience seeker side as well from that sort of point of view, depending on the exact area of your offer or your program, also your existing audiences and the existing data around it, you might be pushing for a slightly tighter overview of that as well. So for example, you might be looking at the 24 to 35 area of that rather than the 18 to the 24. I think that would also be the case where I jump down and look at the subsegments from that sort of point of view around it. They do have a slightly tighter age group around it. For example, E1's The graduate side of it, they are much more likely 24 to 35 from that sort of point of view. The students are more 18 to 24 from that type of area around it. So in terms of the data they come from, they're relatively strong in terms of what that shows us. But I think also, as Katie mentioned, personalising and getting them down, I think hopefully is the way to be able to personalise that a little bit more. If that's a useful.
Thank you. And I think I'm very conscious of the time, and thank you everyone for indulging us for going over. We've got, I think we'll take this last question, which I'll read out now. So you should have several personas for each segment. So can you link different personas within each segment? So for example, geolocation, is it a dynamic tool is the question.
So yes, you could certainly create different personas with each individual segment. What we'd always start with is basically looking to identify what your top 3 segments would be. But in many cases, we do see that audiences for a specific organisation, usually based on their offer, based on that personalisation process we did, usually sort of fit into 1 or potentially 2 processes as well. So I would certainly say it's worthwhile to be able to create different personas based on. So for example, if you feel you need 3 metro culturals profiles based on your offer, then I would do exactly the same process to break that down. Really, what Audience Spectrum here is doing, as of any sort of thing, is basically dividing a guide for them to get personal and then be able to gauge those tactics from that sort of point of view around it. So I think it'd be fine to do based on your objectives, based on your mission, and based on the data that you've got to break it in that sort of way. In terms of it being a dynamic tool, Audience Spectrum, it does update based on the data that within it, the national data, the audience data from that sort of point of view around it, from that sort of point of view around it. So it is relatively dynamic from that sort of point of view. Won't necessarily be changes daily, to be honest, from that sort of point of view around it, but there's it is a live segmentation from that sort of point of view around it, because the data underneath it is live from that sort of point of view.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Chris, and thank you to Katie and Antonia for walking us through the tool and bringing some personas to life and real case sort of examples of how it can be used. So, and thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. I hope to see you again in one of the future webinars. And from that point, we'll sign off and say goodbye. Thank you.